This is an good old-fashioned establishment stitch-up.
Oh, just Harry, who is not a private citizen, but just call me Harry. If only you knew how right you are. So here we are, over a year later now, since Harry first lost his bid for security at the High Court level, and what do you know?
The Duke of Sussex's appeal would be dismissed.
On Friday, May the 2nd, the Court of Appeal unanimously ruled against Harry and dismissed his appeal against RAVEC's decision not to remove his security entirely, as he continues to lie and perpetuate, but to tailor his security detail along with that of his family on a case-by-case bespoke basis. And so clearly, without any rational thought and entirely driven by rage, as they both always are, Harry decided to give an interview, which we will get to, but they also released a statement, and I say they because it's got Meghan's wording all over it when you remove the noise. But regardless, a statement was released perpetuating the false narrative that people deliberately want to put their lives at risk. And then, of course, we've got the interview. Now, I've watched it once because that's all I could stomach, but it's all the same old tired drivel of, woe is me, I can't take my kids and my wife to my country.
For the time being, it's impossible for me to take my family back to the UK safely.
My family is conspiring against me.
What I know throughout this legal process is the interference that was created came from the royal household.
And people want me dead, like my mother.
Some people want history to repeat itself, which is pretty dark.
Oh, and of course it wouldn't be a Harry and Meghan special without the customary, very poorly, thinly veiled threats.
I'm not going to share it at this point, you know? I know all the names of the people that were involved in this process.
Now look, you've heard from recent videos of mine that I am entirely sick and tired of sounding like a broken record. It's been 4 years since the Oprah interview, and the rebuttals are the same because the lies are the same. So I'll only be using clips from Harry's interview to demonstrate how unbelievably ignorant and entitled this overgrown 40-plus-year-old brat really is. I know, as if we needed more proof. And by the way, when I say the word interview, I use that term incredibly loosely, because to anyone who's seen it in full, that is not an interview. That was an unchallenged rant. And in fact, it was so bad that the BBC actually had to release some form of a mea culpa on their own website. Get a load of this. Radio 4, 3rd of May, 2025. This is the important part. Claims were repeated that the process had been, quote, an establishment stitch-up, and we failed to properly challenge this and other allegations. Yeah, don't say. This case is ultimately the responsibility of the Home Office, and we should have reflected their statement. And they've put in the statement from the Home Office, which says, we are pleased that the court has found in favor of the government's position in this case. The UK government's protective security system is rigorous and proportionate. The BBC continue, we also should have given the view of Buckingham Palace. Yes, you should. Which went as follows. All of these issues have been examined repeatedly and meticulously by the courts, with the same conclusion reached on each occasion.
Boom.
And now this is the BBC coming in with its mea culpa. This was a lapse in our usual high editorial standards. I mean, first of all, BBC, you need to get off your high horse, because you've been down in the dumps and, in the sewage for, I think, at least a decade now, if not more. Correct me if I'm wrong. But that's how bad it was. And that statement from Buckingham Palace was so simple and yet so cutting. Clearly telling Harry, we've been watching this from the sidelines all along, eating our popcorn as you waste your time, your energy, and your money. And, as you risk your safety by coming to the UK in the first place. Before we sink our teeth into this case, I wanted to ask all you lovely, hard-working, tax-paying citizens of the UK in the audience, Should you be happy to pay for Harry's security? Because he certainly seems to think so.
If you know that other people are being protected, people that have made a choice for public office, then why wouldn't you be comfortable, happy with someone in my position who's given 35 years service to his country?
Says the person whose spectacle of a wedding cost taxpayers, what, upwards of 32 million pounds or something along those lines? But I guess that doesn't count because they didn't even want that wedding. That was for you.
This thing, this spectacle is for the world.
But seriously, he's assuming that taxpayers are happy in the first place to pay for these retired politicians, specifically prime ministers he's clearly referencing.
People who have chosen this life to enter into public office and then leave get it for life, regardless of whether they have risk or threat to their name. And by the way, I agree with that. I think that is absolutely the right thing to do.
I'm not sure if you know how many ex-prime ministers you're all supporting right now, but according to a 2023 report by Politico, Britain is awash with failed prime ministers and it's costing taxpayers a fortune. For the first time in modern history, the UK now has 7 living former prime ministers, and this is 2023, so it's more now, all of whom continue to receive extensive and expensive security protection. And this is despite the fact that these politicians, which include Theresa May, Boris Johnson, and Liz Truss, are visibly cashing in on the lucrative international speaking circuit for ex-prime ministers. Every time an ex-prime minister travels abroad, even to earn themselves a 6-figure sum for speaking at an obscure business conference, UK taxpayers are likely picking up the security tab. And in case you're wondering how much of your money is going towards this, well, we're never going to find out. Because the usual blanket statement of these things are confidential, and if we disclose how much we're spending on security, that would compromise the integrity of those arrangements and affect the individual's security. So these prime ministers and people protected by RAVEC are, according to this article, protected by an elite unit of the Met Police known as the Royal and Specialist Protection Command, or RASP, which is what Harry wants. And guess what? RASP is already under immense strain. 2 figures with close knowledge of RASP operations, who spoke anonymously, warned that the unit is under pressure. The Met were struggling to find enough security to protect everyone at once, and were having to think about numbers. They also said that officers within the elite unit had complained last year about having annual leave and rest days cancelled, and that for Boris Johnson specifically, they were pulling officers from other teams to try and put his together quickly. I suppose Harry's taking a leaf out of Boris Johnson's book if he's even aware of these details, which I highly doubt. But of course, someone like him wouldn't have any problems with taking police officers out of someone else's security detail. I'm more important than you. I'm a prince. The gist of this case, which has been going on for far too long, is that Harry complained that since 2021, his security arrangements were not merely insufficient, as he said in the interview.
A very low amount of security. I'm not going to confirm what that is, but it is completely insufficient.
But downright unlawful. Now, the main issue for the Court of Appeal was to decide whether the High Court judge, Sir Peter Lane, was wrong in deciding RAVEC had a good reason not to follow its policy documents, which is its Terms of Reference 2017. And we're going to have a quick look at that document in case you don't know what on earth I'm talking about. A secondary issue was whether Harry was entitled to be lumped into the other VIPs category.
There are comparisons that exist. People who leave public office receive lifetime protection.
As I had the immense misfortune of sitting through his interview, I was saying out loud to the TV, but you're comparing apples to oranges here. You're not a politician. You didn't run the country. I mean, your decision to write about your kill count in Spare most certainly doesn't count. That was bragging, my man. And the court also arrived at the same conclusion, namely that Harry's position is unique. Specifically, his comparison to other VIPs was found not to be only inappropriate due to this unique position, but as the court called it, superficial. So rather than comparing yourself superficially to people that you have nothing in common with, people that it would be inappropriate to compare yourself to, how about we look at the list of royals, his own family, who currently do not have full-time elite Metropolitan Police security. Prince Andrew, as we all expected, Princess Beatrice, Princess Eugenie, Zara and Mike Tyndall, Princess Anne, Prince Edward, Duchess Sophie, and Peter Phillips. And they're all living in the UK within the jurisdiction of RAVEC, because that's another major problem that Harry just doesn't want to get in his thick skull. I actually feel kind of sorry for the guy. It must be difficult being that dim. I mentioned earlier the terms of reference, which is the policy that Harry insists RAVEC did not follow and therefore is acting unlawfully. So for the purposes of context and filling in the gaps, let's have a quick look at that document. So the relevant section we want to look at is under the headings responsibilities and the royal household, because Harry kept going on and on and on. I would say half of his interview was about how the royal household had no business sitting on RAVEC's board. They had no expertise. What were they doing there other than conspiring against me?
One of the first things my lawyer said to me was, did you know that the royal household sat on RAVEC? And my jaw hit the floor. So whether it's the media or whether it's anybody else that claims that the royal household and my father and my family don't have any decision-making capabilities on RAVEC, well then what's their role?
Well, it turns out, had Harry just simply taken the time to sit down and read the policy, or maybe his lawyers could have done their job ethically and explained to him themselves, then he would have understood that the royal household does indeed have a defined role on the board of RAVEC, which is as follows. The royal household will provide royal representation and input into the work of RAVEC, advising the chair, who is independent, mind you, on any specific matters relating to members of the royal family, of which Harry is a part of. He keeps saying that himself, and yet he complains that his only representatives on the board is the royal household.
My representative on the RAVEC committee, still to this day, is the royal household.
Moving on. This is to help inform the chair's decision on whether any vulnerability mitigation and or protection measures are appropriate at public expense. And because Harry has such a problem with the King's private secretary being on the board, and then also the Queen's former private secretary, Sir Edward Young, who, by the way, had delivered a letter from the Queen basically imploring RAVEC not to pull security from Harry and Meghan, a fact which Harry definitely knows about because we as the public found out about this over a year ago by now, and yet he conveniently either chooses to deliberately ignore and leave out, or has forgotten about. And I think we know which option applies here. The individual private secretaries and private offices should be consulted as to the practicalities of the vulnerability mitigation and or protection measures which have been agreed. The respective private secretaries will be advised by the Home Office and or the police on the translation of threat levels and risk assessments into practical arrangements for members of the royal family and their households. So they actually hold a key position. It's just, what's so difficult to understand about that, Harry? But now here's the part that Harry has a serious problem with. So he complains that they haven't reviewed his risk assessment in 5 years.
The whole point of a risk management board, which, as I said, everybody else gets, but I haven't, never been given since back end of 2019 was the last one that I was given.
And this is what the policy says on that. RAVEC will exercise the national policy on the provision and delivery of vulnerability mitigation and protection measures for members of the royal family and public figures. Determine on an annual basis or more frequently as necessary, a set of reasonable worst-case scenarios against which potential threats to an individual will be assessed. Evaluate the risk analysis conducted by the Risk Management Board in order to determine which individuals should receive vulnerability mitigation and or protection measures. At a minimum, review annually arrangements that have been agreed and put in place to ensure they remain commensurate of threat and risk. All right, so their policy says review at least once a year. And Harry's like, well, they haven't reviewed in 5 years. Oh, it looks like he may have a point. Except the law in the UK dictates that a public body must, in the absence of good reason, follow its own policies. However, it has also been deemed to be a flexible rule. And this is because A, of the separation of powers doctrine. You don't want the legislative interfering with the executive, interfering with the judicial. And B, because of the need for the court to avoid usurping the function of these expert decision makers. And this is especially pertinent where questions of national or royal security are concerned, because the courts aren't experts in that. So if they usurp the decision-making powers, what's that going to mean for the integrity of these security arrangements? The experts know best, basically, and the courts respect that. Now, 3 experts as part of this court case have provided evidence as to their decision-making process, as to how they arrived at the decision that, you know what, Harry doesn't need an annual review because we have an entirely different bespoke system in place for him. Again, remember, he's a unique circumstance which RAVEC had never encountered before, and so they created a unique solution. The former chair, Sir Richard, explained, quote, "It made much more sense to assess the threat and risk issues arising from the claimant's occasional visits to the United Kingdom by reference to their particular context, rather than conduct a risk analysis for a principal who was no longer based in Great Britain and whose activities, when he was present, were not likely to be regular." And the court added in that Harry does not explain why this conclusion was incorrect. Moving on to Mr. Sean Hipgrave, who was from 2019, the director of the Protect and Prepare in the Homeland Security Group. And he explained, quote, "If there were no alternative process available which enabled RAVEC to consider the full range of circumstances applicable to the claimant, Prince Harry, then the RMB assessment could be used, even if it would not work as effectively for the reasons Sir Richard explains. In the claimant's case, and uniquely, RAVEC has in place for him a bespoke process whereby his intended presence in Great Britain is considered in advance by reference to the specifics of what is planned and why. This means that a much more focused consideration can be given, informed in particular by the views of the Metropolitan Police as the experts in the delivery of protective security and the risks likely to be posed by the various contexts. It will also be informed by relevant threat assessments." So again, in summary, the dude doesn't live here. So we've come up with a better solution tailored to fit his unique situation. Every time he visits, we will be more than happy to conduct this RMB threat analysis that he's crying for, as long as he gives us notice. That's all Harry has to do, give them 28 days notice of his plans so they can ensure his safety. I never understood why this was such a problem with Harry, and I still don't, other than ego, entitlement. Prince William gets full-time protection, then so should I. Finally, the current chair concurs and stated, "To be clear, RAVEC continues to treat the claimant as not being within its cohort, but that when a request for protective security results in an authorization by RAVEC, the claimant re-enters the cohort for those purposes and to that extent. The claimant is not treated as a principal to which the terms of reference apply, both because he's not within the cohort and because he has in place specific bespoke processes applicable to him." And in case anyone out there was still thinking, oh, well, maybe Harry didn't know, maybe no one told them, maybe his lawyers just took advantage of him to make money and never explained. No, because Harry saw, I believe, the decision letter which was sent on the 28th of February of 2020 to Sir Edward Young, where Sir Richard, who wrote the letter, specifically explained this entire thing in layman's terms. Have a listen. "I am writing to you about security arrangements within Great Britain for the Sussexes in the light of the change in their roles from full-time working members of the royal family to privately funded members of the family, and of their decision to spend the majority of their time in Canada for the next 12 months at least. I understand that the Sussexes will travel back to the United Kingdom to pursue their private charity work, and that Her Majesty the Queen may from time to time invite them to attend royal occasions in the United Kingdom in their private capacity and to participate in family events. This is the critical part. RAVEC is responsible for risks arising within Great Britain, as they affect principals who are in almost every case resident within Great Britain. The future arrangements for the Sussexes do not fit readily within this framework. RAVEC will continue to monitor the security of the Sussex family, including through periodic threat assessments. Should anything change in terms of specific threat, this will be communicated to the Home Office through established channels with the police and actioned as necessary. Against the background set out above, there is no basis for publicly funded security support for the Sussexes within Great Britain. He goes on to explain that it would be best if Harry would communicate his future plans so that they can determine what to do. The letter ends by referring to the 12-month review period and saying, hey, if things change, then we're happy to look at an appropriate security provision as necessary. So Harry knew about all this all along and still decided to pursue this case, waste millions of pounds of taxpayer funds, only to lose anyway. The Court of Appeal, much like the High Court, agreed that based on all this information, based on all this reasoning, RAVEC did indeed have a good reason to depart from its policy. And so the court says Harry's disagreement with the adequacy of the security provided does not give rise to a legal claim. And I would tell Harry, simply because you disagree with something, it doesn't mean that RAVEC is, what did he say?
And that RAVEC can abandon the very processes, the very expert processes that exist to protect individuals.
And now that the courts aren't doing his bidding, he's trying to get the attention. He's actually literally calling upon both the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State, who was the defendant in this case, because national security is within her remit, to review this decision and review RAVEC and basically ignore the separation of power, ignore the court, and do his bidding anyway.
Yes, I would ask the Prime Minister to step in. I would ask Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, to look at this very, very carefully, and I would ask her to review RAVEC.
Well, joke's on him, because apparently he's already gotten a firm no from the current Secretary of State. According to the latest reports, government insiders flatly dismissed Harry's demand, with Whitehall sources emphasizing that the security body is designed to be strictly independent from political influence. It's beyond entitlement at this point. He's promoting corruption. In the interview, Harry drops this little golden line.
This is an good old-fashioned establishment stitch-up.
Oh, just Harry, who is not a private citizen, but just call me Harry. If only you knew how right you are. Because from where I'm sitting, this is indeed a good old-fashioned stitch-up. But not one orchestrated by the establishment or, by your family, the firm, whatever you want to call it, but by your own wife. From the way you met, when she donned your mother's perfume and pretended she didn't know who you were. It was a blind date.
Yes, it was definitely a setup. It was a blind date.
To the way she conned you into thinking she was gung-ho, ready to hit the ground running and live her life in service of the Commonwealth.
And also being able to go around to the Commonwealth. I think it's just the beginning of a...
There's a lot to do.
Really?
There's a lot to do.
To how she pretended to be a victim in the palace and in the media. And of course, how she conned you into thinking that you'd be the most beloved, admired, successful, rich couple in the history of ever if you'd only just leave the royal family. And that's not even counting the paparazzi catastrophic chases, which, by the way, were mentioned in this court case. So our suspicions of cooking up that entire charade for the benefit of this case were entirely spot on, although I'm sure none of us are surprised. So if you want to talk stitch up, how about you talk to your wife, since she's clearly the expert.
I was such a fraud.
I bet she rues the day she ever said that.